Hari Om to one and all. Let us start now with a short prayer. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kansa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagat Guru. Hari Om and my pranams to Lord Sri Krishna. My pranams to my Gurudev, Harihar Maharaj, and to all the devotees of the Lord present here today. Today is the first of a series of 3 talks, which is an introduction for beginners to the Bhagavad-Gita. So what is the, what we call the introduction that we will do? This is in conjunction with the celebration of Janmashtami, which this year falls on the 30th of August. And what is Janmashtami? As you all will know, that on Janmashtami we celebrate the appearance of Lord Krishna on this earth approximately 5,200 years ago. So since we are celebrating the appearance of the Lord, we must understand that throughout the many yugas, throughout the many years and centuries, the Supreme Being has been taking various different forms, and he has descended to earth in different forms. The Supreme Being has come in Rama form, Lord Rama form. He has come in Narasimha, which is half man, half lion. He has come in Vamana form, which is the dwarf, and so many other forms. And one of the forms that he chose to descend is the Krishna form. And each form that the Lord has taken, he has taken to accomplish a particular mission on earth. So once the form came and the mission was accomplished, the form went away. And then came another form for a different purpose or mission. So what is the purpose of the Krishna form? For this, we must refer to the Bhagavad-Gita, especially chapter 4. So all those of you who have the Gita with you, please turn to chapter 4 of the Gita and look at the verse number 1. In verse number 1 of the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, I have given this supreme knowledge, I have given it to the sun god, Vivaswan. So sun god is Surya Devata, which was there right at the beginning of creation. What is this imperishable knowledge that the Lord had imparted to the sun god? It is the 4 Vedas. So the 4 Vedas, the knowledge was imparted to the sun god, who in turn imparted this knowledge to Manu. Manu is the first human being on this planet Earth. And Manu in turn imparted this knowledge to Ikshvaku, who is the first king of the Solar dynasty. Lord Rama is the descendant of the Solar dynasty. And then from King Ikshvaku, the knowledge went in 2 directions, which is mentioned in verse number 2 of chapter 4. There the Lord says, in one direction, the knowledge was passed on to the Rajas, to the kings. So they attained this knowledge, how to live their life and how to govern the kingdom based on this knowledge. And the Rajas or the kings in turn imparted this knowledge to their children. That was one method of transmission. The other way was this knowledge was transmitted to what we call to sages. And these sages, they set up gurukuls or schools, and they in turn imparted this knowledge to the masses. So in this way, the knowledge was passed on from the Lord to the Devatas, to human beings, and to all the masses. Then what happened to this knowledge? Krishna says in verse number 2 of chapter 4, he says, after a long march of time, remember this knowledge was given at the beginning of creation. After a long march of time, this knowledge was lost. Now, when Krishna says that this knowledge was lost, it doesn't mean it was totally destroyed. What he means to say is that this knowledge was practiced less and less. There was less importance given to spiritual knowledge. Why? Because as human beings progress, we gave more and more attention to material growth, more material possessions, to power, to possessions, to money, to property, etc. There is a saying, man has become a material giant, but a spiritual dwarf. So we have grown extremely well in our material wealth, but we have not developed our spiritual path. There is nothing wrong. We need material wealth for our food, for our shelter, for our clothing, but we should not neglect the spiritual part of our growth. So what did Krishna do? He said, since this knowledge was less and less practiced and it was so valuable, this knowledge for human beings, that Krishna says, I had to descend in this form, the Krishna form, and re-establish this knowledge. Now, what does this tell us? Krishna re-established this knowledge in the form of Bhagavad-Gita. That means, what is the Bhagavad-Gita? It is but a condensation of the Vedas. The Vedas contain thousands and thousands of verses. So the Bhagavad-Gita is a simplified condensation of the Vedas. In fact, the Vedas, how does the knowledge of the Vedas match with the knowledge of the Gita? The Vedas contain two sections. The first section is called Karma Kanda. Kanda means section, Karma means action. So in the Karma Kanda of the Vedas, it is explained all the various duties and responsibilities of human beings. What is our duty and responsibility towards God, towards other human beings, towards our elders? And the Karma Kanda talks about rituals and prayers. Karma Kanda in the Vedas is called Karma Yoga in the Gita. That is one and the same. So that is one part of the Vedas. The second part of the Vedas was known as Jnana Kanda. Jnana means knowledge. And you may have heard of this term Vedanta. Vedanta is Jnana Kanda. It deals with the most highest knowledge, the most supreme knowledge. Jnana Kanda does not deal with prayers or rituals and things like that. It deals with the most highest knowledge of Brahman, of the Supreme Being. That's why this Jnana Kanda is also known as Upanishads. You would have heard this term Upanishads. What does Upanishad mean? Upanishad contains three words. Upa, Ni, Shad. Upa means near, Ni means down, Shat means sit. Near, down, sit. It means that the disciples sat at the feet of the Guru and received the most supreme, the most highest knowledge. So, Jnana Kanda of the Vedas contains that supreme knowledge of Brahman. In the Gita, it is called Jnana Yoga. So, Karma Kanda is Karma Yoga, Jnana Kanda is Jnana Yoga. So, the knowledge of the Gita is basically the knowledge of the Vedas. Now, the other thing we must know about the Bhagavad-Gita is that the Gita is an extract from Mahabharata. Many people don't know this, but in the Mahabharata, there is a section which is called Bhishma Parva. Parva means section. Bhishma is a character in the Mahabharata. In this Bhishma Parva, chapters 25 to 42 are extracted separately. And I would request those people who have not shut off their audio, please close it now. There's a lot of interruption. So, Bhishma Parva, chapters 25 to 42, 18 chapters are separately extracted from Mahabharata and given to us as the Bhagavad-Gita. Now, why are these 18 chapters so important? Because these 18 chapters contain the supreme dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. That's why we have a separate text called Bhagavad-Gita. So that means the Gita contains this sacred dialogue that gives us the knowledge. Now, with this understanding, let us enter into the Gita. So when we look at the Bhagavad Gita, it is a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. Now, two questions I want to make very clear here, because this repeatedly comes up when students talk about Bhagavad Gita. Now, this knowledge was given by Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra 5,200 years ago, because Arjuna, being a warrior, suddenly came to the realization that he did not want to fight this battle and he wanted to leave the battlefield. So he was in a state of confusion. Now, the two questions that we must ask ourselves is, Arjuna had a problem on the battlefield. Arjuna was the soldier. I am not a soldier. I don't have any problem on the battlefield. I don't have any battlefield. So in what way is Arjuna's problem related to my problem? Because if I cannot identify with Arjuna's problem, then why should I be studying the knowledge of the Gita? How is it useful to me? First question. Second question, if this knowledge is so important, why did Krishna choose a battlefield to deliver this knowledge? Why did he not choose a quiet ashram or the banks of a river or in a forest and give this supreme knowledge? Why did he choose a battlefield? And you can imagine, in a battlefield, all the soldiers are preparing for war. There's so much of confusion and noise. And in this battlefield, the Lord Krishna gave this knowledge of the Gita. So let us look at these two questions now. First of all, let us look at Arjuna's problem. Is it the same as the problems we are facing now? What is the title of the first chapter of the Gita? That will give us the answer. Chapter 1 of the Gita is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Yoga means basically to unite with the Supreme Being. Okay, that is the general meaning of yoga. Every chapter of the Gita contains the word yoga. So every chapter of the Gita teaches us a lesson how to unite with the Supreme Being. First chapter, Arjuna Vishada. What is Vishada? Vishada means despondency. So you may ask, what is despondency? Let us look at the dictionary meaning of despondency. The dictionary says despondency means low spirits from loss of hope or courage. It also means a state of dejection, a state of depression, sorrow, extreme sorrow. Now, Arjuna's dejection or depression may be caused by different factors, but are not human beings today also facing the same type of problems? Don't we also face depression, dejection, sorrow, loss of hope? It may be due to different circumstances, financial circumstances, family relationships, business problems, and even the COVID situation that we are going through now, the uncertainty of tomorrow. There's a lot of anxiety, loss of hope, frustration. Aren't we all going through the same emotions? So the emotions of human beings have not changed. Thousands of years ago has been the same. Now it's the same. Thousands of years later also, human beings will face the same emotions. So that's why the study of the Gita teaches us how to overcome these emotions, how to lead our lives the correct way. So the message of the Gita is as relevant thousands of years back, is as relevant today, and will continue to be relevant for the future. Second question, if this message was so important, why choose a battlefield? Now, this is something we have to understand. Let us look now at this. Imagine this chariot. Everybody knows this very famous picture of the chariot. There is the grand chariot, Arjuna's chariot. Arjuna is sitting in the chariot. The chariot is pulled by 5 horses. The horses, the reins of the horses is held by Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna is Arjuna's charioteer, his Sarathi. So this is very allegorical. It is beautifully explained, this whole philosophy of the chariot, and that tells us the message of the Gita. In one of the Upanishads called the Katho Upanishad, there is a section called Rath Kalpana. Rath means chariot, Kalpana means image of the chariot. And it explains everything so beautifully about the chariot. What is the chariot? The chariot represents our body. So that means if one chariot is destroyed, you can always go and take another chariot. Arjuna, who sits in the chariot, represents the soul which is in the body. What about the 5 horses? The 5 horses represent our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, the 5 senses. Because we lead our lives, we are pulled by the 5 senses to the world. There are things we like to see, like to hear, like to taste. So our life, our journey, our body is pulled by these 5 senses. But there is a message here. The 5 horses are held by the reins. The reins represent the mind. And who is holding the reins? Krishna. Krishna represents the intellect. So the message here is what? The senses should be controlled by the mind should be controlled by the intellect, and then our journey in life will be smooth. And where is this chariot parked? Arjuna's chariot is parked in the middle of the battlefield. On one side are the forces of good, on the other side are the forces of evil. So isn't our life also like a battlefield? Every day we are facing this challenge between trying to stay on the good side and trying to avoid the negative tendencies. Both sides are pulling us. So our life itself is like this chariot in the middle field. We are literally in a battleground facing the internal battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So the Bhagavad-Gita, we must understand that's why Krishna chose to deliver it in a battlefield. There is an allegory to our lives also. So now we understand that we have to try to stay on the good side. And there is no coincidence. Now, another question is many people ask, what is the difference between mind and intellect? Because people get confused. Mind is something very emotional. It follows likes and dislikes. Intellect is rational. It tells you what is right and what is wrong. A simple example is a diabetic. A diabetic checks his blood sugar level and finds it's very high. And then somebody puts a nice chocolate cake in front of him. Now, if he follows his mind, the mind will say, doesn't matter, you eat one slice today, doesn't matter, tomorrow you can avoid sugary stuff. But if the intellect comes in, it says, no, stop, don't do that. You know your sugar level is high, don't eat that piece of cake. So again, our life is also a battle between the emotional mind and the rational intellect. Now, since we need to stay on the positive side, it is no coincidence that the Bhagavad-Gita in 2 words gives us the whole message. What are the 2 words? If you look at chapter 1, verse 1, the first word in the Gita is called dharma. Chapter 1, verse 1, first word in the Gita is called dharma. If you go right to the end, the last chapter, chapter 18, verse 78, the last verse, the closing verse in the Gita is called mama. Dharma, mama, first and last word. What does it mean? It means my righteous duty. The Gita is telling us, what is your duty? So you may ask, but what duties do I have to do? Now let us understand. We have taken this human form. We have taken this human form. After many, 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 many births, we have come and taken this human form. And we should know what to do with this human form. What is the purpose of this human form? What is the goal of this human form? Many people think that this human form is to do these 5 things: eat, drink, sleep, work, procreate. These are the 5 common things. But ask yourself this, if these are the only 5 things that human beings do, in what way are we different than animals? In what way are we different than insects? Because animals also eat, drink, sleep, work, and procreate. So obviously there must be some other purpose for this human form. And that is what we need to find out. Just like when we buy a piece of equipment, we are given an operating instruction booklet how to operate the equipment. Now that we've got this human form, we need to refer to the Bhagavad-Gita, which is our operating instruction manual, how to operate this life. In fact, Adi Shankaracharya is a very famous sage. I'm sure many of you have heard about him. He lived a very short life, only 32 years. But in the last 16 years of his life, he wrote many interpretations. He interpreted the Bhagavad-Gita, the Upanishads, etc., etc. And he wrote his own works called Viveka Chudamani, Bhaja Govindam, Atma Bodha, Tattva Bodha, etc. In Viveka Chudamani, Adi Shankaracharya writes a very interesting thing. He says, 3 things in life are the most difficult to get. And only by the grace of God, if you will get these 3 things. What are the 3 things? 1, this human form. So we should not take this human form lightly. We have gone through many, many years, many lives, accumulated a lot of punyam, and God has graced us with this human form. Why? So we can learn the scriptures, because understand, the human form is the only creation of the Lord that is gifted with the intellect to study the scriptures, to read the scriptures, to worship God, to know God. So first is the human form. Second is what Shankara says, what Shankara terms as mumukshutvam. Mumukshutvam means desire for moksha. Having got this human life, there must be a desire to aspire to a higher goal. What is the goal of human life? We must question ourselves. Otherwise, Shankara says you have wasted this opportunity of human life. There is no guarantee you will get back this human life again if you don't appreciate it. So, mumukshutvam. And the third is the grace of a living guru. So when all these 3 factors are there, we must capitalize on them and move ahead on the spiritual path. So dharma mama, that is very important. Now, the next question comes. We want to walk on the spiritual path. We want to walk on the path of dharma. And one thing we know, whatever you want to accomplish in this life, you need the help of your mind. Whether you want to be successful in the material world, you want to have a successful business, you want to be successful in your studies, you want to be successful in your careers, you must be a master of your mind. As they say, if you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything. The spiritual world is not different. If you want to succeed on the spiritual path, the first thing is you must gain a total mastery, a total control of your mind. So for this, let us now refer to Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 6, excuse me, verses 5 and 6. 2 very often quoted verses in the Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. What does it say in these 2 verses? It deals with the mind. Krishna says in these 2 verses, your mind can be your friend, and that same mind can be your enemy. And we only have one mind. So either it can be your friend or either it can be your enemy. Which type of mind is your friend? The mind which is endowed with right knowledge. So you must understand, when you have right knowledge, it leads to right thinking. Right thinking leads to right action. That type of mind which has the right knowledge gives you the right thinking, makes you do the right action. That is your friend, because it will take you to your goal, to your destination, to your journey. Who is your enemy? Your enemy is that mind which is filled with all kinds of impurities. It will give you impure thoughts, will make you do impure actions and bring you down to degradation. So Lord is saying you have to take a control of your mind. Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, he said, Mana jite, jag jite. The one who is the master of the mind is the master of the world. And we know that to accomplish anything, we need to get a control of the mind. So now the question is, we know that it is very important for us to get a control of the mind. And all of us have a mind. We know when I say mind, I also mean the intellect. Both are very important to get your mind and your intellect disciplined. Now, we all have a mind and intellect. The question is, why don't we use this mind and intellect? What are the barriers? What is stopping us from utilizing the powers of the mind or the intellect to reach our spiritual goal? For this, I want you to turn to Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 2, verse 1. The answer is given there. What is the problem? What is the obstacles in our mind that is preventing us from using the harnessing the powers of the mind and the intellect? This chapter 2, verse 1 gives us the answer. Now, I particularly pointed to this verse because many a times we read the Gita and we just take the literal meaning. We don't try to analyze or go deeper into this meaning. With this one line, you will understand. Let us look at this chapter 2, verse 1. And there is one particular line I just want to point out to. It is on the, if you see the Sanskrit text, it is the second line. Second line says, Ashru Purna Akula Ikshanam. There are 4 words there. Very significant for us to understand. Now, what we saw in chapter 1, we saw Arjuna giving many excuses for not wanting to fight this battle. And then at the end of chapter 1, Arjuna sits at the back seat of his chariot and he is in a very troubled state. He doesn't know what to do. So in chapter 2, verse 1, the condition of Arjuna is being described to us. Now, what it says, Ashru Purna Akula Ikshanam. Ikshana means eyes of Arjuna. What was wrong with the eyes of Arjuna? Purna, they were full. Full of what? Ashru, tears. Now think, when the eyes are flooded with tears, what happens? Our vision becomes blurry, is it not? That is akula, it becomes blurry. So Arjuna was sitting there crying like a child, eyes full of tears, and his vision was blurry. But think a little bit more deeper on this one line. When you see a person's face, supposing the person looks very worried, the person has tears coming down his eyes, what does this reflect? The external appearance of a person reflects the internal mind, does it not? The condition of the mind will determine how the person behaves externally. If the mind is calm, happy, cheerful, then the person also appears happy, cheerful. So obviously, this crying situation refers to Arjuna's mind. Now, take that example. Tears cloud the eyes, the vision becomes blur. When the mind is overpowered by sorrow, what do we lose? We lose our faculty to think clearly. Any negative tendency that overpowers our mind, it can be sorrow, it can be grief, it can be anger, it can be greed. When people's mind gets overpowered by greed, what do? They do acts of corruption. They want quick money so that they can enjoy their life. Because why? Greed has overpowered their mind. And I'll give you another example, anger. Anger is called temporary insanity. When anger overtakes your mind, you lose the capacity to think rationally. What do? You just simply shout whatever words come to your mouth. Or you may even hit the person in front of you, so that you have lost your capacity to behave in a decent manner. Any impure quality that takes over your mind, you will lose the capacity to be rational and think clearly. And that was Arjuna's problem. He just didn't know what to do. And when we are in this situation, what should we do? The Bhagavad-Gita gives us the answer in chapter 2, verse 7. This chapter 2, verse 7 is a very beautiful verse. It is often quoted in the Gita, and it is like a prayer verse for all of us. In fact, it's such a beautiful verse for us to go in front of the altar every morning and just pray to the Lord with this verse. I will just recite this verse for you. Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava Prachami tvam dharma samudacheta Yakshreshanishchitan bruhitanme Shishyasteham shadimam tvam prapanam. Now remember, prior to this verse, what was the relationship with Arjuna and Krishna? Arjuna was the master, the owner of the chariot. Krishna was his charioteer. Krishna will have to take instructions from Arjuna. But what is Arjuna saying now? He's telling Krishna, Shishyaste aham, I am your disciple, Krishna. You don't have to take instructions from me now. I am surrendering at your feet. You be my guru. I am your disciple. I want to take instructions from you now. Why? Dharma samuda cheta. He says in chapter 2, verse 7, second line. Dharma samuda cheta. Cheta, my mind is samuda, is totally confused. It is upside down. About what? Dharma. What is my duty? Confused of my duty. I don't know what to do. So even when we are also in a state of confusion, just go there, pray to the Lord and ask him to guide you in your life. So this is what Arjuna did. He surrendered to a higher authority. We surrender to invoke the blessings of the Lord. We surrender to this knowledge. Once we surrender, then only we get benefit of this knowledge. So what did Krishna do the minute Arjuna surrendered? He started giving the discourse of the Gita, which starts at chapter 2, verse 11. Chapter 2, verse 11 is the first teachings of Krishna in the Bhagavad-Gita. That is said to be the seed verse. And what is the concluding verse in the Bhagavad-Gita? Chapter 18, verse 66. Although chapter 18 finishes in 78 verses, yet the final teachings of Krishna are completed in chapter 18, verse 66. There the whole philosophy of the Gita is given. Now, what exactly is the Gita trying to tell us? I will summarize a little bit and then we will take it up in the second and the third session. Since the Gita is talking about the mind, it tells us that once we have dealt with the mind, the issues of the mind, we learn how to control the mind, everything will move smoothly. So, what are the three main problems with the mind we have to understand? Everybody faces this problem, the three main problems. The first problem is called malam, M-A-L-A-M, malam. Malam means dirt. What is the dirt in our mind? There is so much of dirt. Greed, anger, pride, ego, lust, jealousy, you name it, there are so many types of impurities in a person's mind. So first problem of the mind is malam or dirt. What is the remedy the Gita gives to remove this dirt? In the first 6 chapters, chapter 1 to chapter 6, the Gita, Lord Krishna teaches us the path of karma yoga. We will look at karma yoga more in detail in the next session. So, problem is malam, dirt. Remedy is in the first 6 chapters. It is called karma yoga. What is the second problem with the mind? The second problem is called vikshepa, the monkey mind, the mind that runs here, runs there. You try to sit down and listen to a spiritual talk, but your mind is running everywhere around. You try to sit down and read the Gita, your mind is running everywhere around. What is the remedy for this? The middle 6 chapters of the Gita, chapters 7 to 12, talk about Upasana Yoga. We will discuss this also. Upasana Yoga. Problem is Vikshepa, monkey mind. Remedy is Upasana Yoga. What is the third problem of the mind? Is called Ajnanam, which means ignorance. Now, I'm not talking about worldly ignorance. You may have a degree, a master's, a PhD. You may be the most wisest person in the world. But still, ignorance here we're talking about is ignorance of your real self. What is your real self? Are you this body? The scriptures are saying, no, you are actually the Atman. You are the eternal Atman. You are the soul. So this is what we call Ajnanam, ignorance of ourself. What is the remedy? Remedy is obviously Jnana Yoga, which is given in the final 6 chapters of the Gita. So these 3 yogas, Karma Yoga, Upasana Yoga, Jnana Yoga, is what we will be discussing in the next 2 sessions, which is a remedy to overcome the 3 main problems of the mind, which is Malam, dirt, Vikshepa, monkey mind, and Ajnanam, ignorance. And after this, we will stop.